Welcome to the Worldshapers, conversations with authors about their latest books. I'm your host, Edward Willett, and this episode's guest, Erna Buffie, talking about the new edition of her acclaimed debut novel, Let Us Be True. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Worldshapers, the podcast where I talk to other authors about their latest books. I say other authors because I am myself an author. My name is Edward Willett, as you can see. And my latest novel is The Tangled Stars. It came out about a year and a half ago in audiobook and ebook from Daw Books in New York. It's my 12th novel for Daw Books. And it's a far future outer space adventure featuring an AI-uplifted talking cat who becomes a starship captain. It's also a heist novel. So please check that out when you get a chance. I'm also a publisher. My publishing company is Shadowpaw Press, and actually the authors I'm talking to right now in the Worldshapers for now and the next little bit are authors that I have published through Shadowpaw Press. My latest thing from Shadowpaw Press is this one, which actually comes out just after this episode goes live. Corridor to Nightmare is the last novel by the late, great Canadian science fiction and fantasy author Dave Duncan. We'll be launching this at When Words Collide in Calgary in a couple of weeks. And I also published a previous posthumous novel by Dave called The Trader's Son. I don't have a copy of it handy to hold up, but there are two of those now. The last books really that Dave wrote, and I'm very pleased to have them with Shadowpaw Press. And I'll be talking to Dr. Robert Runte, who edited them both for publication in the near future. That'll be on the Worldshapers. The other recent, or actually still upcoming book is this one. The Door at the End of Everything. This is a collection of poetry by Saskatchewan poet Linda Monahan that largely grew out of her experiences as a writer on the ward at the hospital in Prince Albert. It has a strong mental health focus because she was working a lot with mental health patients and continues to do so. So that one is out. And as you can see, I have an eclectic collection. So I go from fantasy to poetry. I also have these three middle grade books by Governor General's award-winning author Art Slade. These are very recent as well. Return of the Grudstone Ghosts is a ghost story set in Moose Jaw. Ghost Hotel is a ghost story set in the Besborough Hotel in Saskatoon. And Invasion of the Bodies, not the Body Snatchers, Invasion of the IQ Snatchers is science fiction, and it's set in Nanaimo. The three are collectively called Canadian Chills. These are reprints. They originally came out, close to 20 years ago from Kato Books, and I'm very happy to have them out with these great new covers as well by Saskatchewan artist Eileen M. Will. Just wonderful covers, so very proud of those. Other two recent titles I want to mention are, of course, as I always do, the downloaded, the 25th novel by Robert J. Sawyer, Canada's best-known science fiction fantasy author, Hugo and Nebula Award winner. This started life as an audiobook original with Brendan Fraser in the cast. And I got the print rights for North America, so I'm very, very proud to have this one, and I hope you'll check it out as well. And finally, I also want to mention this recent anthology, Shapers of Worlds Volume 4. I've kickstarted 5 of these. The 5th one is in the works right now. This one came out in January. The next one will be out in January. And they are short stories by authors who were all guests of the Worldshapers for the first 100 and I don't remember how many now episodes, for the first 5 years anyway, in a bit. I only interviewed science fiction and fantasy authors, and it was only every 2 weeks. So I was able to do anthologies that featured as many of the authors that I had talked to as wanted to be part of it. Now that I'm weekly and a little wider in my genre reach, probably that's the last. Shapers of Worlds Volume 5 will probably be the last of those anthologies, but not necessarily the last anthology by any means. It's just that I think they're going to wrap up that series with Volume 5. Finally, the most recent book that has been released and is not just in the future is Let Us Be True by Erna Buffie, and this is the book we will be talking about today. So let me introduce you to Erna Buffie. If I can find my glasses. There they are. Oh, much better. Everything's suddenly clearer. Erna Buffie is the author of Let Us Be True, as I said. Short stories by Erna have appeared in Room, Prairie Fire, Potter's Field Portfolio, and the Vagrant Review of New Fiction. Let Us Be True, which was her first novel and was originally published by Kato Books in 2015, was nominated for the Margaret Laurence Fiction Prize at the Manitoba Book Awards and also for the First Book Award. Erna is also an award winning documentary filmmaker who has worked for CBC's The Nature of Things and a variety of other national and international broadcasters. Her film Smarty Plants won Best Direction at the Canadian Screen Awards and aired on PBS's Nature under the title What Plants Talk About. So let's talk to Erna now. So, Erna, welcome to the Worldshapers.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here, Ed.
Now, I always start these things by finding a connection. And of course, we have an obvious connection in that I'm your publisher. So, so the book we're going to be talking about,
yeah.
Let Us Be True, has just come out from Shadowpaw Press.
And it's lovely to see it back in print again. My first publisher, as you know, was Cotto in Saskatchewan. And like so many medium to small size publishers, they collapsed at a certain point, so the book went out of print. So it's absolutely wonderful to have it back in print again. So thank you.
Now, I always start at the very beginning, as from the Sound of Music. Let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start.
Yeah.
So, where did you grow up, and how did you get interested in words and writing? Now, you're also a documentary filmmaker, so we'll want to talk about all that as well.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Winnipeg. The book is set roughly in Winnipeg. Some of the names have been changed, place names have been changed, but it's very much Winnipeg. It's very much a prairie book, and it's interesting because I started it in Halifax, in a little house by the ocean. So I lived in Montreal for 20 years and then Halifax for 7 years. And when I was in Halifax, I had a fabulous writing group, and the book was pretty much completed there. I think there was one more chapter I wrote when we moved back to Winnipeg. So yeah, it's an interesting journey, and I'd always wanted to write about my mother's generation. Um, a generation that sort of and her parents, in a sense, which informed her, that stretched from the First World War to the Second World War. And those women kept a lot of secrets. I mean, in the Depression, periods like the Depression were, for my mom, actually a good time. For a lot of kids, not so much. A lot of kids were abandoned. There were a huge number of suicides in the Depression. And so there were a lot of secrets kept. A lot of, my mom's friends sort of being in orphanages, but never talking about it, or being adopted, or so it was kind of that generation I wanted to write about, and that time period I wanted to write about, which was so seminal to those people.
Well, when did you become interested in writing? Was that as a very young person, or was it something that came along later?
I was actually probably around 10 or 11 when I wrote my first poem for my grandfather's birthday. And but it kind of I think realistically I started to think about it or fantasize about it after I read my first adult novel at the age of about 12, which was Llewellyn's How Green Was My Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, oh my God, if I could write something like that, I would be so happy. But, you have to put bread on the table, so and pay your rent. So I was really lucky. I was hired to do research on a documentary film. I loved it. I started doing research at the film board. I moved to Montreal, did research at the film board, then started producing, then started writing, and eventually went, I don't want to be correcting other people's mistakes anymore by writing their narration. I'd rather correct my own mistakes. So I started directing, which was hugely satisfying. And also, I mean, I think documentary filmmaking informs my writing in that I learned over, the 20 years I was doing it, that how to think visually, but also documentary film is storytelling. Like any form of art, in a sense, is storytelling. And I was able to transfer both of those skills, I think, into writing this first novel.
That's interesting because I often talk to people who are involved in theater, and I myself a theater guy, and I do think that that sort of visual storytelling, which is perhaps even more so in filmmaking than on stage, but I do think that it helps to have that kind of a different sense of how to tell a story than from having done something in that sort of visual realm.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was writing, I could see all the locations.
Hmm.
Like if I was inside the cafe, I saw that cafe, or inside the Chinese restaurant, I was inside, I could see that Chinese restaurant. So yeah, it's maybe there are a lot of writers like that, whether they made documentary films or not, but I had soundtracks going through my head. I had, furniture details. Yeah, writing fiction is a really interesting process.
Did you have any formal training in writing fiction, or was it something that you just
No,
developed through your reading?
no, not at all. I did a degree in history, actually. So I had no training in documentary film, nor did I have training in writing fiction. But I learned as I went. And I was really lucky when I finished the novel. Actually finished the novel 5 years before it got published. I was one of those writers who stuck it in a bottom drawer.
Mm.
And it wasn't until I moved back to Winnipeg and I was about to turn 60. And I decided I had read about Sage Hill and I knew one of my favorite Canadian writers was going to be there, Helen Humphreys. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go and do this workshop with Helen Humphreys and I'm going to write her and say, do you have the time in the midst of all of this to read a manuscript? So she said, yeah. Send me your manuscript or give me your manuscript as soon as you arrive and I'll get it read. So she read it, which was incredible.
Hmm.
And, the first line was, it's good. It's really good, was what she said to me as soon as we met after she'd read it. And I thought, oh, wow, why did I wait 5 years? Like, why did I wait 5 years? It was just, it was the confidence boost and the not just a confidence boost. I mean, she really gave me some solid advice on what to do with the first novel. Her advice was, and in retrospect, she sort of said, I don't know why you didn't send it to a big public, maybe you should have sent it to a big publishing house. But she said often debut novels get lost in the shuffle in a big publishing house because they're, busy promoting the latest flavor of the month, and your book comes way down on the publicizing. So she said, I'd suggest you go to medium-sized publishers like Cotto or like Goose Lane. I went to Goose Lane first, and the editor really loved what I sent, but she said it just doesn't fit our list. And Cotto was the second, and they said yes. So I was very lucky.
You've also had a number of short stories published. Did those come before the novel, or did you write the novel first and then start selling short stories?
No, it's interesting because when I originally started the book, I saw it as a series of linked short stories.
Hmm.
I think that's the way I fooled myself into writing it, was to go, these are short stories. This isn't really a novel. And so one of the chapters was published, the first chapter about her Pearl's daughter, Darlene, was published by Room. And then I had another separate short story published by Vagrant and others. But my first publication, I believe, yeah, was a chapter from the novel. And then as I continued to work on it, the connections were just too strong. Each chapter kind of stands alone, but at the same time, it was about a family. So I went, okay, I'm writing a novel. I'm not writing short stories,
Well, we
which
should
was
probably.
kind of cool.
Well, and I can see that. Obviously, I've read it, so I can.
Yeah.
I can see that. Yeah. Um,
Well,
the
that's another thing about filmmaking. I mean, with filmmaking, you make dramatic cuts time frame, in locations, so I think that part of filmmaking also impacted the way I wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
Because the book is very much, well, I'll give you a story. When I said to Helen, I've got this extra chapter, where should I put it? And she said, put it anywhere. Because that's the way the book works. It just kind of builds on the past and present story as you go along. And I could have shuffled those chapters in any direction, but instinct took me in the direction it did.
Yes, the timeline is, well, it's not present because it's set around, what, 2002 or 4 or somewhere in there. Present
Yeah.
and past, and oh, look, they decided to start hammering, so just ignore that sound down in my backyard.
I can't hear it, so that's okay.
Oh, good. So this was probably a good place to give some sort of synopsis of the book. How do you describe it?
Well, the book is about a woman who has kept her past a secret from her daughters. And it's impacted not only who she becomes, but who her daughters become. Because those secrets fester in her and push her in a certain direction emotionally and in every respect. So she's a pretty hard-assed woman in many ways, pretty tough. She's been
Mm-hmm.
abandoned many times. And when the novel opens, she feels as if she's been abandoned by her daughters as well. But as the novel progresses, that begins to change. The daughters change, as does she, as
And
she
we look,
faces her own mortality.
and as we learn more about it, we begin to understand how she became the way she is. So
Yeah, I hope so, and I hope the book's funny too. A lot of people
it
say,
is.
"Oh, she's just like, I can't relate to this woman. She's just too angry." It's like, well, actually, she's pretty funny.
I think she is. Yes.
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
so
yeah.
you kind of talked about the inspiration for this, that you wanted to write about your mother's generation, and you talked a little bit about the process, but once you decided you were writing a novel, did you plan it out in any kind of detail, or were you
No.
creating these sort of scenes and then putting them together, another
Yeah,
Broadway
I
reference?
mean, lots of people, like Helen, for example, has said that her novels are so detailedly outlined that it takes her no time at all to write the book.
Mm-hmm.
I don't outline at all. I'm just kind of led by my nose from one thing to the other. And that, I think some writers work like that. Some are very organized and very outline oriented. I can see the value of that, but I think some people find that secure makes them feel more secure about where they're going. For me, I feel like I'm fencing myself in. So it's better that I don't outline and just let the book evolve. Doesn't always work, but
Well, this is I think this will be episode 180 of the podcast. So I've heard every possible variation on how people approach these things.
yeah, every writer's different. Every writer's different.
I think the one
Even in terms of when they write and where they
Mhm.
write and how they write, it's very idiosyncratic, I think. But
I
there
think
there are lots of good, solid things that people need to do if what they want to do is write fiction.
on
One
the
of which
outlining
is,
side, so I was just going to say, I always like to tell this story because on the outlining side, the one person that I always mention, his name is gone out of my head now, but he's Peter V. Bruce, and his method is 150-page outline before he ever actually starts putting in the scenes. And then, like you,
yeah,
there are others who just, well, maybe not quite like you, Kendara Blake, who's a very well-known fantasy writer. She started the book I was talking to her about with a single sentence and an idea, and then just ran from there. So you
yeah,
get those
yeah.
variations all through there. And then
Well,
I stepped.
that's a really interesting thing because I remember my partner Brian's aunt had passed away, and we went to the funeral, and the funeral was way out in Transcona in a kind of environment where it was that kind of kind of synthetic reddy orange rug on the floor, and it was just slightly down at the heels, and I looked out over the people sitting there, and I thought, if I'm ever going to write something, I'm going to write about these people, because the amount of love and affection in that room, and just grounded, ordinary people. And I thought that's who I want to write about. I want to write about my mom's generation, and I want to write about people like this.
You had mentioned that everyone works in a different way. What is when you're working on something? When do you find time to do the fiction when you were doing other things?
Well, it was interesting because I was lucky. I was able to take a year, or actually more than a year, a couple of years off. I did a couple of small films in between, because we were doing a great little series called Recreating Eden, which was about gardens, and they were half hours. They were easy to do. It was like a 2 or 3 day shooting schedule. So I did a bit of that, but I was pretty free in terms of my time. So I got into the habit of writing between 10 and 2. That seemed to be the optimal time for me, was from 10 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon, often missing lunch, but I'd have lunch after.
So
And
writing at home, it sounds like, not in a coffee shop or anywhere like
no,
that.
no, I'm not a coffee shop girl. I gotta be where I gotta be home. I gotta be in, in schleppy clothes, and maybe not get out of my pajamas, and make my coffee and try to get conscious, and then start to write. And I still do that. I mean, I'm writing a lot of op-eds for the Free Press now on environmental and climate issues, and I operate the same way there. I start, if I'm going to be writing one, I start at 10 in the morning. These are shorter, so I generally knock off before noon. But yeah, it's just a habit now.
Once you
I
have
don't get up at 4 in the morning like Terry Morrison.
no, I don't either. Once you had a draft of the novel, what was your revision process like? You've talked about showing it to the Sage Hill author, but
Yeah, it was interesting. She also edited the book, Helen Humphreys. And her initial comment was, I had an opening chapter on Henry that was totally different. It's interesting because the first publisher I took it to said, can you make the rest of the book as funny as the chapter on Henry? And her comment was, this is the wrong chapter about Henry. You have to write a new opening chapter. And so that was a big change. But most of the changes that she suggested as an editor had to do with me assuming too much from the reader. So, for example, she said, you have to have a scene where Athena finds out about Darlene's affair. We have to see her realize that Darlene's either having an affair or is about to have an affair, because the reader can't write that in. We can't just see it from Darlene's point of view. Why do I have bubbles going?
that was weird.
Very weird. Anyways, there were like 5 things like that where she said, I need more here. You need to give me more. But that was her, primarily her editorial comments.
And
I just need clarification.
Was on the sort of copy editing, line editing side of things. I find that there are certain things that I invariably, someone will point out that I'm doing like too much of. The one I always mention is that my characters occasionally make too many animal noises, so they will growl dialogue or they will snarl dialogue. So were there any sort of that level of the actual writing writing level that came back?
No, she didn't. No, she didn't have any. She had one line in the book, and even now when I read it, I question whether or not she was right, because I held on to the line. But that was it. I mean, she didn't do any copy editing.
So it went to Cateau.
It was Mm,
and was published in 2015, was it, or 14?
yeah. No,
Uh,
15 or 16.
and
I think it's 15.
the response seemed to have been good. Were you very pleased with the response you got to it when it came out?
Oh,
First time?
yeah. I mean, they were wonderful, and the designer was a dream. Like, the designer was fantastic, and they had a great artist do the mock-up of the cover, and it was a great process working with them. And then Nick, who had been the managing editor, retired, and somebody else took over. And they arranged a book tour that most debut authors don't get, because they paired me with Sharon Butala.
Hmm.
So I did Calgary, BC. I went to BC. I did Montreal. I did Toronto. I mean, it was, and then on my own dime, I did Halifax, because I wanted to go back and see friends anyways. So we arranged a little tour there. So the book got great promotion, and it sold really well after the readings. It's just I think with debut novels, it's hard to generate a huge readership. You just need to create that buzz, and I'm hoping that buzz happens with this edition. But you never know, you know. But the feedback I did get on the book was by far hugely positive. People were moved by it. They liked it,
And a couple
which
of
is
award
great.
nominations for the Manitoba Book Awards.
Yeah, that was lovely. I mean, particularly the Margaret Laurence Prize. That was, I kind of wasn't totally surprised by the first book nomination, but I was really pleasantly surprised by the nomination for the Margaret Laurence Fiction Prize. And I'm a huge Margaret Laurence fan, have always been a huge Margaret Laurence fan, and it would have been nice to have won that, but it was equally nice just to be nominated for it.
And then, of course, unfortunately, because they were one of my publishers as well, Kato went away and went bankrupt.
Oh,
And a lot of books were orphaned. And I've actually brought out a few Kato titles through, including my own and some by Arthur Slade. And I've got a couple more still to come in these
and
reprint
my friend
editions.
Anne Mazzocco.
Yes. So I should hold it up. This is the new edition here. Very different cover
Yeah,
from the original book.
I'm really happy with that cover. The first cover, I loved it. But over time, I came to realize that it was almost too dark. Covers do sell books. And I think that picture of that little girl was so kind of tragic. It would have pushed people away from it. Whereas I think this is a very welcoming cover. It brings people into it. So I loved
And this,
both the covers. I think this one is more welcoming.
and as I recall, you found this photograph in the
I
is it in the
did. I
Library
did.
of Congress, was it, where this came from?
Yeah.
It was black
Yeah.
and
I'm
white,
a
and
big
I
fan.
colorized it, but
Which I love. And I love that era of photography. It's the photographers who worked for the Department of Agriculture, ironically, and they documented the Depression in the United States. And what happened on the prairies there is identical to what happened here, in some ways, possibly even worse. So there's this incredible treasure trove of photographs. So the first photograph was a Dorothea Lange photo. This is Abe Rothstein. And I think it's one of his best photos of the Depression.
the people, there will be a high resolution version of this on the webpage for this interview. But what I like about it, and I'll hold it up again, is the very direct gaze of that child looking at you from
Yes.
the arms of the mother. And it's like, yeah, what do you want?
Yeah, and that's Pearl, right? That's
Yeah.
that shy little girl who becomes very tough when she loses her mother. So yeah, it was perfect, because the mother was as loving as I imagined Letty was, but the little child just has that edge staring out at the camera like, yeah, like you said, yeah, what do you want?
And it seems appropriate that your book, both the original version and this one, were their cover art is actually a documentary photo. So it kind of ties into the other side of your
Yeah,
career.
yeah, yeah. I mean, in retrospect, I would have been interested to see what they might have designed based on the book, but as I said, I love both covers, so I'm a happy girl.
That's good.
I love
So
them for very different reasons.
the book just came out in June, so it is out there for everyone to, and it's in both ebook and print. Um, where can people keep up with you and what you are doing, and what are you doing? What are you working on now?
Well, I have a couple of fiction projects in process, but as I said, I write a lot of op-eds on the environment and climate, and so I'm republishing those on my website as well as other articles that I've written. You know, everything from food and Jane Austen to promoting my own book to uh, uh, blogs on gardening. So they can follow me at Train of Thought, and that's ernabuffie.com. And on Facebook, I also have an author's page on Facebook.
I'm just going to say any social media, and you just answered the question. So.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm not a tweeter. I'm not an Xer or Instagrammer. I probably should be, but I'm not.
Oh, I don't know. I'm all those things. And again, we were talking about promotion before we started the interview, and it's really
Yeah,
hard to tell what works and what doesn't work. But the idea
absolutely.
is, people find you, and hopefully they find the book, and hopefully it gets a new life here. I certainly am proud to have republished it, and am really enjoyed reading it. And I think readers will find it well worth their time.
Yeah, I hope so. It's certainly a book. I certainly loved all of those characters,
I did
and
too.
I loved writing.
So that's Let Us Be True. And thanks, Erna, for talking to me today.
Oh, my pleasure. It was lovely. Thanks for inviting me.
And thanks to Erna for that conversation. I enjoyed talking to her. I hope you enjoyed the chat as well. And I hope you will check out the book, Let Us Be True. Here, let me hold it up again, just so you can remember what it looks like. There it is. Let Us Be True by Erna Buffie. Available now wherever fine books are sold. That's it for this episode of The Worldshapers. Just some housekeeping notes. First of all, The Worldshapers is available at its own website, theworldshapers.com. But of course, as you may very well have discovered already, you can watch it right here on YouTube, on my channel, youtube.com/Edward Willett. One of the other things you will find on my channel is, you'll find a lot of things. There's a lot of video of me singing, for example, but you will also find my walking in Regina videos. Several times a week, I live stream my walks around the city of Regina, and it's proved a popular thing. So please check that out if you'd like to see Regina and hear me blab on about this and that as I walk. The Worldshapers is also on Facebook at The Worldshapers and on X at The Worldshapers. You can find me. I mentioned where you can find me on YouTube. I'm at edwardwillett.com. I'm on X at ewillett. I'm on Facebook at edward.willett. I'm on Instagram at edwardwillettauthor. And then I'm also on Threads and Blue Sky, and you can find me. My publishing company, Shadowpaw Press, is at shadowpawpress.com, another place where you can buy Let Us Be True and the other books that I've talked about with authors that I'm publishing. It's also on X at Shadowpaw Press, and on Instagram at Shadowpaw Press, and on Facebook at Shadowpaw Press. All right, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you will come back as I continue to talk for the next little bit with some of the authors that I'm publishing through Shadowpaw Press in a wide variety of genres. And then once that's done, I will probably be back and talking again to a wider variety of authors from other publishers, large and small. So thanks for watching this one, and I'll be back next time. Bye for now.